Emily Dawson's heart pounded as the wind howled through the mountain valley, the icy snow cutting at her cheeks, when she spotted a man lying half buried in the snow at the foot of the mountain. But what she didn't know was that the stranger she was risking her life to save was none other than Richard Caldwell, a billionaire whose world of unimaginable wealth and power would soon collide with hers in ways she could never imagine. Who was this man? Stranded and vulnerable, and why had fate placed him in the grip of the blizzard? And more importantly, what would he do once he realized a poor girl had saved his life? Could she ever imagine that a single act of courage would forever change the course of her own destiny? And would he ever see her as more than the girl who rescued him from death? Emily Dawson's boots sank into the thick snow as she trudged deeper into the mountain's base, the wind screaming through the towering pines like a warning she couldn't ignore. Every step was a battle. The icy needles cut her cheeks and froze the tips of her fingers despite the tattered gloves wrapped around them. She tightened the fraying coat around her shoulders, cursing the winter that never seemed to ease, and scanned the white wasteland ahead, eyes straining against the storm's fury. That's when she heard it, a faint, uneven groan, almost swallowed by the roar of the blizzard. Her heart jumped. Another step and then another, her instincts screaming louder than reason. Something or someone was out there. She moved cautiously, the snow cracking under her feet, and spotted a dark shape partially buried beneath the snow. Her breath hitched. Kneeling beside him, Emily brushed the snow off his pale face, noticing the expensive fabric of his torn coat. His dark hair was frozen at the edges, lips tinged blue, and one leg twisted unnaturally beneath him. Dead weight against the snow, he barely stirred. Panic surged through her, but there was no time to hesitate. She hoisted him over her shoulder, each step a struggle against the cold that gnawed at her bones. By the time she reached her cabin, exhaustion had carved lines into her face, but she refused to falter. She laid him gently on the couch, the small space suddenly claustrophobic with urgency. The warmth from the fire brushed against his icy skin, and Emily's hands moved methodically, cleaning his wound, wrapping the broken leg, murmuring words of reassurance she wasn't sure he could hear. Hours passed. The storm outside raged on, but inside Emily studied him, the contrast impossible to ignore. Expensive clothes, sharp features, and a presence that seemed foreign to this remote wilderness. He stirred finally, storm-gray eyes opening, confusion flashing in their depths. "You're in my cabin," she said simply. "I found you half dead in the snow. I don't remember," he rasped, clutching his temple. "What's your name?" Emily asked, cautious but insistent. "Richard. Richard Caldwell," he murmured. The name sounded vaguely familiar, a distant echo of something she couldn't place, but it meant little in the face of survival. His eyes scanned the cabin as if trying to anchor himself, lingering on jars of preserved food, hanging herbs, the simple, rugged life she and her grandmother lived. I had my phone." "My wallet?" His voice faltered. Emily noticed the panic flare behind his gray eyes. Nothing was in his pockets. Whoever left him out here intended for him to die. Emily's green eyes narrowed. "You think someone tried to kill you for money?" she asked, her voice low, steady. A bitter laugh escaped his lips. "Seems likely." The fire crackled between them, a fragile boundary against the cold and danger outside. Emily had seen enough to understand that betrayal, greed, and desperation were not limited to city life. Yet here, stripped of the trappings of wealth, Richard Caldwell was vulnerable, human, fragile. And for some reason, she couldn't turn away. By morning, Richard's strength was returning, though the limp in his leg remained. Emily moved with practiced efficiency, tending the cabin, stacking firewood, brewing pine needle tea. Richard watched quietly, the unfamiliar simplicity of her world gnawing at the edges of his consciousness. Each meal, each chore, each small act of survival was foreign to him, yet strangely grounding. "You live like this every day?" he asked finally, voice laced with disbelief. "Yes," she said simply. "It's not easy, but it's life." Richard shook his head, stirring the stew absent-mindedly. "I've never had to work like this. I've never lived like this." Martha, her grandmother, snorted from the stove. "City boy won't last a week without her," she muttered, her tone a mixture of skepticism and fondness. Emily shot her a look but didn't speak. Some things she thought were better left unsaid. Days passed. Richard adapted slowly, his hands learning labor, his eyes learning humility. He chopped wood, carried water, and for the first time, he understood what it meant to truly earn his survival. Emily watched him, noticing subtle changes. The way he looked at her cabin, the respect in his eyes, the patience forming in his movements. One evening, as the northern lights flickered faintly across the sky, he sat staring into the fire. Emily handed him a bow, teasing, "You're going to teach me to hunt now." Richard shook his head, a small smile breaking through. "I'm terrible at this," he admitted, but something in him had changed. He wanted to try, not for wealth, not for power, but because he had someone waiting for him in a world that no longer made sense to him, the girl who had saved him. And deep down, Emily felt it too. That strange pull in her chest, the awareness that this stranger would not just survive the snowstorm, but might survive her world too. But questions lingered in the frozen air. Why had Richard Caldwell been left to die? Who had betrayed him and why? And how would his arrival in her humble life forever change the destiny of a poor girl who had only wanted to save a stranger? The morning sun struggled to pierce the thick gray clouds over the mountain valley, casting the Dawson cabin in pale, cold light. Richard stirred on the couch, the ache in his leg a sharp reminder of the night he had nearly frozen to death. Emily had already been up for hours, tending the fire and stacking fresh wood, her movements efficient, almost mechanical, yet full of purpose. He watched her for a long moment, struck by her quiet strength, the way her green eyes scanned the horizon as if calculating every risk in the wilderness. He had never seen anyone like her. "Breakfast is almost ready," she said without looking up, setting down a steaming bowl of pine needle tea. The aroma was earthy and unfamiliar to him, but comforting in a strange way. He took the cup hesitantly. "You live like this every day?" he asked again, unable to hide the curiosity in his voice. "Yes," Emily replied simply. "Chop wood, hunt, gather firewood, tend the cabin, survive. Life doesn't wait for anyone." Richard's fingers curled around the tin cup, feeling the warmth seep through his gloves. He thought of his penthouse in New York, the constant hum of deals, phones, and deadlines, a life built on schedules, power, and money. And yet here, in this small cabin, the simplicity and rawness of survival felt real, raw, and grounding. He cleared his throat. "I've never had to work like this. I've never lived like this." Martha Dawson, Emily's grandmother, snorted from the stove. "City boys never last a week without someone to cook for them," she muttered, sharp blue eyes assessing him. Richard gave a faint laugh, realizing how out of place he was. "I suppose that's true." Emily glanced at him, a hint of amusement in her expression. "You'll adapt, or you'll freeze." Despite her teasing, Richard noticed the weight of responsibility in her movements. Every chore she performed was not just survival, it was habit, discipline, and unspoken love for this place she called home. And for the first time, he realized that money couldn't buy this kind of strength. Over the next few days, Richard tried to adjust. Chopping wood left blisters across his hands, and hauling water from the frozen stream drained him in ways no boardroom negotiation ever had. Emily guided him patiently, correcting his stance, showing him how to swing the axe efficiently, how to respect the rhythm of the wilderness. "You don't have to hit it like it insulted your stock portfolio," she teased one afternoon. And for a moment, Richard laughed, a genuine, unguarded laugh he hadn't felt in years. Yet the weight of his life outside the cabin pressed on him. Memories clawed back in fragments, the luxury lodge near Fairbanks, Jonathan Reed pouring him a drink, the sudden darkness, and the blinding cold. He remembered waking in the snow, stripped of everything, betrayed by someone he had trusted. The betrayal cut deeper than frostbite ever could. Jonathan, his assistant, his confidant, had tried to kill him for control of Caldwell Enterprises. The realization made his chest tighten. Emily noticed his quiet moments of reflection but didn't push. She had learned long ago that some wounds ran deeper than frostbite or broken bones. One evening, after Emily had gone to tend the small vegetable garden near the cabin, Richard lingered by the fire, staring into the flickering flames. The weight of his life and the choices he'd made pressed on him. For the first time, he considered the morality of his empire, the deals he'd signed without thought, the people whose lives had been swept aside for profit. The man he had been before, cold, calculating, untouchable, felt like a ghost. Emily returned, wiping her hands on a rag, carrying a bundle of herbs for drying. She leaned against the table, studying him quietly. "You look like a man who's just figured something out," she said. Richard exhaled slowly, meeting her gaze. "I think I know why I was out there," he admitted. Why I nearly died. Emily sat down across from him, curiosity sharp in her green eyes. Go on. He hesitated, tracing a pattern in the fire's glow. I was in Alaska for a business meeting, a mining operation, a gold reserve. $1 billion deal. I didn't consider the consequences, not the moral ones. And then Jonathan tried to kill me, left me in the snow. His voice darkened, a bitter edge slicing through the warmth of the cabin. The deal would have been his, not mine. Everything I built. Gone. Emily's jaw tightened. He tried to kill you. For money. Richard nodded slowly, the fire reflecting in his storm-gray eyes. And I trusted him. I shouldn't have. But that's my world, power, greed, loyalty measured by profit. Out there I was nothing. Here I had someone who saved me for no reason at all. Her eyes softened slightly. You mean me? He didn't answer right away. Words felt inadequate for what he felt. The girl who had risked her life for a stranger had, without knowing it, shattered the walls he had built around himself. For the first time, wealth and power seemed trivial compared to trust and courage. Outside, the wind whispered against the cabin walls. Inside, two worlds collided, one of survival and humility, the other of betrayal and ambition. Richard realized he had a choice now, a choice that had nothing to do with money or deals, a choice that involved understanding, redemption, and something entirely unfamiliar, hope. But the questions lingered in the cold air. Could he reconcile the world he came from with the one he was discovering? Could he survive betrayal and still hold on to the lessons Emily had unknowingly taught him? And could a billionaire, used to commanding everything, truly find himself in the hands of a poor girl who risked everything to save him? The wind cut sharper that morning, carrying with it a bitter edge that made the Dawson cabin feel even more remote. Richard stepped outside, the crisp air burning his lungs, the snow crunching beneath his boots. For the first time, he truly saw the wilderness not as a backdrop, but as a living, unforgiving force. Mountains towered above, their peaks jagged and white, and the dense forest seemed to stretch on endlessly, a labyrinth of frost and shadow. Emily emerged from the cabin, old axe slung over her shoulder, a pair of gloves tossed toward him. If you're going to stand there all day looking lost, at least make yourself useful, she said. He caught them clumsily, feeling the weight of her world pressing on him. He had spent a lifetime signing contracts, managing empires, and commanding respect with a name alone. Yet here, he was utterly powerless, learning the basic rhythms of survival. Chopping wood, really? He muttered, the smirk on his face betraying both disbelief and resignation. Unless you'd rather freeze tonight, city boy, she shot back, a playful glint in her green eyes. Richard swung the axe, missing the log entirely. Emily winced but didn't say a word, letting him try again. He gritted his teeth, shifting his stance as she had shown him, and on the third swing the log split cleanly. A small victory, yet it sent a strange warmth through his chest, pride unlike anything he had ever earned with money or deals. Emily smiled faintly, crossing her arms. See? Not so useless. The next hour passed in tense, quiet coordination. He fetched water from the frozen stream, patched gaps in the old cabin roof, and followed Emily's instructions silently, his body slowly learning the rhythm of labor. With every task, he felt the gap between his world and hers shrink, the raw simplicity of life in the wilderness replacing the artificial layers of power and wealth he had been draped in since birth. But the wilderness demanded vigilance. That afternoon, while they tracked a rabbit through the pine forest, the forest suddenly fell silent. Birds ceased their chirping, the wind seemed to hold its breath, and Richard's pulse accelerated. Emily froze, a hand lifting to signal him. A deep guttural growl echoed from the trees, a sound primal and terrifying. Richard's eyes widened as a massive grizzly bear emerged, muscles rippling beneath dark fur, eyes locked on them like a predator assessing prey. Every instinct in him screamed to run, but Emily was calm, her body taut, ready. Slowly, she pushed him behind a tree, raising her rifle in one fluid motion. She fired a warning shot. The deafening crack shattered the silence. The bear huffed, hesitant, then turned, retreating into the forest. Richard's hands shook uncontrollably, his heart hammering against his ribs. That was, he gasped, words failing him. Welcome to Alaska, Emily said simply, slinging the rifle over her shoulder, a small smirk teasing her lips. But beneath it, her eyes softened as she glanced at him, alive and breathing. You're lucky I don't let it eat you. Richard laughed breathlessly, the fear still thrumming through him. But it was a different kind of awareness now. Admiration, awe, and a dawning understanding. Emily had risked everything without hesitation, a stark contrast to the world he had come from, where people calculated risks in boardrooms, not snowstorms. That evening, by the cabin fire, Richard found himself reflecting on everything he had taken for granted. Wealth, power, influence, none of which would have saved him from the mountain, the storm, or the bear. Emily, with no thought of reward, had saved him. And suddenly all the empire he had built felt hollow beside the truth of her courage. "Why did you save me?" he asked quietly, staring into the fire, the question both simple and impossible. Emily looked up from her tea, her green eyes steady, unwavering. "Because I couldn't leave someone to die. It's that simple." Her words struck deeper than any deal or profit margin ever could. Richard realized that for the first time he had been powerless, not just physically but morally. And in that vulnerability he saw something he had never known: humility. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil inside him. Memories of betrayal flashed unbidden. Jonathan Reed's smile, the luxury lodge, the poisoned drink, the icy snow waiting to claim him. The man who had tried to kill him for power and money had underestimated one thing: human kindness. And now, with Emily, he understood that wealth meant nothing without integrity, courage, and trust. Emily's presence, constant and unwavering, grounded him. Each shared chore, each moment of quiet conversation, each survival lesson was building something stronger than gold or contracts. Richard began to understand that his life as he had known it had been incomplete. But questions lingered, gnawing like the icy wind outside. Could he truly belong in this world of simplicity and survival? Could the lessons he learned in the mountains shape the man he wanted to become? And most dangerously, could he risk everything again? This time for someone he had just begun to care for deeply? As the fire crackled and the wind howled, the distance between two worlds, billionaire and poor girl, city and wilderness, survival and luxury, shrank imperceptibly. And for the first time, Richard Caldwell, billionaire and survivor, realized that he was no longer lost in the snow. He was lost in something far more complicated, far more real: the girl who had saved him, and the life she offered that might change him forever. The sky was a dull gray, heavy with snow clouds that mirrored the storm in Richard's mind. He had left the Dawson cabin hours ago, trudging back toward the city and the empire that awaited him. Each step was heavier than the last, weighed down by the betrayal of Jonathan Reed, the man he had trusted more than anyone, and by the thought of leaving Emily behind. The snow crunched under his boots, a reminder of the world he had almost lost, and of the girl who had pulled him back from death. By the time he reached the edge of the wilderness, his muscles burned but his mind was focused. Jonathan had already begun to consolidate power, assuming Richard would not return. The betrayal was calculated, cold, and relentless, exactly the kind of threat only a billionaire accustomed to manipulation could orchestrate. Yet now Richard was different. He had tasted humility, had understood courage, and for the first time, he felt capable of confronting not just his enemy, but himself. Back in the city, the sleek lines of Caldwell Enterprises headquarters loomed like a fortress. Richard moved through the hallways, observing familiar faces: executives, assistants, security, all of whom had never truly known him. They had seen only the mask, the power, the wealth, but today he carried himself differently. He was no longer just a CEO. He was a man who had survived the snow, the wilderness, and betrayal, and had come back with a clarity he had never known. Jonathan Reed was waiting, confident, smug, as though victory were already his. Richard paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of the snow, the mountains, and Emily's presence behind him anchor his resolve. "Jonathan," he said finally, his voice calm but edged with steel. "You made a mistake." Jonathan's smile faltered. "Richard, I assumed you were gone, dead even." "I almost was," Richard admitted, "because someone tried to kill me for profit, but unlike you, I survived. And now everything you've done to seize control ends here." Legal documents were prepared, security footage examined, accounts frozen. Richard dismantled Jonathan's plans with precision, not with anger, but with the insight he had gained in the mountains. Patience, observation, and decisive action. In the end, Jonathan was removed, stripped of his authority, and facing charges that would ensure he could harm no one else. Richard leaned back in his office chair. The city skyline sprawled before him. Victory should have felt hollow, yet it didn't. For the first time, power wasn't his measure of worth. The thing he valued most, the courage, integrity, and unflinching spirit of the girl in Alaska, was what mattered. That evening, he returned to the Dawson cabin. The journey had been long, the snowstorm heavier than expected, but anticipation drove him forward. Emily was stacking firewood, the wind tousling her hair, her cheeks flushed from cold and exertion. She looked up, wary, then surprised as he approached. "You came back," she said, voice catching slightly, eyes wide. Richard stepped forward, holding something small in his palm, a silver compass, worn and familiar. "I promised I would," he said softly. "I couldn't stay away, not from this place and not from you." Emily stared, the wind whipping around them, carrying the scent of pine and snow. Her heart hammered, a strange, thrilling rhythm that mirrored his. This isn't your world," she said quietly. "It isn't anymore," Richard replied, his storm-gray eyes steady on hers. "I've seen what truly matters. And it's not power or money or deals. It's courage. It's kindness. It's you." She took the compass, turning it over in her hands, the cold metal a link between them, a reminder of survival, trust, and choices that could change everything. The mountains stood behind them, silent witnesses to a transformation that had begun in the snow, continued through betrayal, and culminated here, between a poor girl and a man who had everything, yet had discovered what he truly needed. Weeks later, Emily walked through the small village carrying supplies for the Dawson Initiative, the nonprofit Richard had established in her name to help rural communities. Richard followed, dressed in simple work clothes borrowed from her grandfather, chopping wood, repairing cabins, learning the rhythm of a life he had once ignored. He was clumsy at first, but Emily's patient instruction and his determination had transformed him. They worked together side by side, a living testament to the bridge between two worlds. That evening they stood by the river, northern lights dancing above, painting the sky in streaks of green and violet. Richard turned to Emily, his hand finding hers naturally. "Can I stay?" he asked, voice steady but vulnerable. Emily searched his face, seeing the man who had survived betrayal, snowstorms, and fear, the man who had learned humility, courage, and the value of love. She smiled, slipping her hand into his. "Yeah," she whispered. "You can stay." The lights shimmered above them, a silent witness to a life renewed, to love discovered in adversity, and to the understanding that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or power, but in courage, integrity, and connection. Emily, the girl who had saved a stranger in the snow, and Richard, the billionaire who had discovered himself through her bravery, stood together, two worlds merged into one. The mountains loomed, silent but protective. The snow fell softly around them, a quiet benediction. And for the first time in both their lives, they were home. Not because of where they stood, but because of who stood beside them.